Good. I had to make them, they turned my mic on early. My wife's like, we can hear you. I was out in the lobby talking. I haven't started yet. Billy's late, everybody, just so y'all know. Dude, they had my mic on when you gave me those instructions. They turned it on 3 minutes too early. I was like, what if I said something bad about Billy? Then the whole church would hear. Hey, I do want to publicly acknowledge, I do appreciate the guys that run the sound and PowerPoint and YouTube and all the other technology. I know there's been a lot of hiccups the last few weeks with all this new stuff, but they do a great job. That is probably one of the most thankless jobs in the church because if they do it well, we don't notice anything. We only notice when it doesn't go well. And so we do want to give a shout out to the guys that are hiding up there that we can't see. Just kind of wave so everybody can kind of see you up there. Say they're like nothing. They're like all leaning back like, nope, not us. So go ahead and open up to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11 is where we're going to be studying from tonight. I appreciate Matt filling in last week for me. That was, he did a great job. I think I surprised him when I showed up. I wasn't supposed to be here last week. We were supposed to be at camp, but we had an all-star game Sunday afternoon, and with the timing, we couldn't get to camp. So we cleaned up and we came to Walter Hill, and Matt saw me walk in. I think he was probably thinking, did he lie to me? I did not. I wasn't supposed to be here, but I appreciate him teaching for me last week. Next week, I will be leaving after morning worship for a camp, and unfortunately, I've struck out a lot, and so Billy's going to teach for us next week. So I do apologize ahead of time for that. And then the week after, I'm actually going to be away again, and I don't know who's teaching that one yet. So, hey, if you want to teach, come talk to me. But I do appreciate everybody filling in during this very crazy season of life, so to speak. But Billy will do a great job next week. I do appreciate you teaching. I'm just giving you a hard time. I got to be nice to him or he'll back out on me and I'll be in trouble. So we're in this series looking at Hebrews chapter 11, talking about the different people that make up this list that we often refer to as the Hall of Faith. And tonight we come to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7, and we learn, or we're going to read about, talk about a man by the name of Noah. Noah is no stranger, probably anyone sitting in here tonight. But when I think about Noah, there's so much about Noah's story, specifically Noah's life, and we tend to focus on one aspect of that story with the flood and the ark, because that is a big portion of what we know about Noah. But when you think about the idea of extinction, when you think about the idea of some catastrophic event taking place that basically ends all of humanity or ends all of life, most of the time that's like a Hollywood movie. Right? That's what we see in the movies when the aliens come and they take over Earth and kill all the humans, or the machines take over, as some movies portray it, or maybe there's some kind of asteroid or something that's in space and it's going to bear down and it's going to destroy humanity as we know it. Most of the time, those things are Hollywood scripts. They're just movies. And I think for a lot of people, this is kind of how we treat the story of Noah. I want to, on the front end of what we talk about tonight, I want to establish what the story of Noah is not. Okay? The story of Noah is not a movie script. I mean, they've made a movie, I know. Some of you maybe have seen it, right? The story of Noah. Probably a few different movies about that, but there was one Hollywood made just a few years back that was pretty popular. But the story that we're talking about tonight, the story we read about in Scripture, is not a movie script. Okay? It's also not a fairy tale. Sometimes I think we treat stories of Scripture as if they're just fairy tales. Once upon a time, this took place, and that's kind of how maybe we talk about those stories. But Noah's story of the flood is not that. Neither is it what I would call a children's story or a VBS story. I think we have kind of pushed it to the point where that's what it is, right? We talk about Noah and the flood in our children's classes, right? We teach that to them. It's one of the VBS stories we study. Hey, let's study about Noah and the flood. And we make it out like it's this exciting children's story. And it's not. In fact, if you were to put a rating beside that, it wouldn't be for kids, okay? It wouldn't be G-rated because of what you read in the story of Noah. Noah's story is about the disobedience of the people. They were so wicked in that day and time that God decided, hey, I'm going to bring about destruction. And that destruction is going to come through the means of this flood, and there's going to be a lot of death. In fact, everyone but 8 souls were destroyed in that flood. So I've often found it ironic that we treat this like it's a children's story. We teach it to our children, but it's very violent. And it's very heartbreaking. And really, it's a very sad story. So as we get into it tonight, I want you to keep all that in mind as we go through and look at the faith of Noah. And I want you to understand what we're talking about tonight. Again, this is hard for us because we are so far removed from the days of the flood, obviously. And I think for a lot of times for us, it's easy to just kind of put this one on the back burner as, I believe it happened, but I don't really stop and think about it or dwell on it too much because it was so long ago, once upon a time in a land far, far away, so to speak. But I want you to understand when you think about the story of Noah that Jesus believed the story of Noah to be a true story. He believed the story of Noah to be real. He believed the flood to be real. In fact, so real that he compares the second coming, the great day of the Lord, to the days of Noah in Matthew 24. Where there he says, for as were the days of Noah. Okay, he's speaking. Hey, I'm reflecting upon history. As were the days of Noah, so is the coming of the Son of Man. All right, I'm taking this historic event from the past, and I'm going to talk about this historic event that's going to take place in the future. And you know what? I'm going to combine them and show you, hey, they're equally real. They're just as much real, one as the other. Just as the days of Noah, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. For they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark. Okay, Jesus calls it the same way that we read about it in Genesis chapter 6. Hey, Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came, that's what God said he was going to do, and swept them all away, those who were outside the ark. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. Jesus bookends this idea of Noah and what happened with Noah and the historical accuracy of what took place with the flood. And he says, hey, that's what the coming of the Son of Man is going to be like. And so with that in mind tonight, we get to Hebrews chapter 7 and verse number 11. Where there we read Hebrews chapter 11 verse 7. What did I say? Well, you know what I meant. You got to get all set. I know I upset you about talking about your outfit tonight, but come on now. Right? Hebrews 11 verse 7. 7:11. I guess that was in my mind for some reason. By faith Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world, and he became an heir of righteousness that comes by faith. I want you to notice as we begin tonight, we talked about this idea a little bit a couple weeks ago when we kind of did an introduction on this chapter. As you think about Hebrews chapter 11 is centered upon really one word. What's the one word? Faith. Right? Faith comes from the Greek word pistis. It's used over 200 times in the New Testament, but in the letter to the Hebrews, it's used 32 different times. But interestingly enough, 24 of those times is found here in Hebrews chapter 11. And 18 of those times all begin the same way, by pistis, by faith, and then it gives a name. So here I want you to notice how this starts. By faith Noah. We're told a little bit about Noah, and then notice how it ends. What phrase? By faith. His story begins by faith, and his story ends with this idea of by faith. Now, ironically enough, Noah lived a long, long time. Does anybody know how long Noah lived? Say it again, Ms. Bertle. 950 years. You find that at the end of Genesis chapter 9. 950 years. And he gets one verse in Hebrews chapter 11. It's so ironic that here's a man who lives one of the longest times that we read about in the scriptures, and yet he's given so little verses here in the Great Hall of Faith. But as we get started, I want you to notice again this idea of faith and what this tells us. Faith serves as a foundation of a believer's life before God. That's the whole point of this chapter, right? To help us understand that faith serves as the foundation. And so what you're going to see as we read through this scripture tonight and talk about it is everything that Noah did, he did it through faith, right? His foundation, his relationship with God was built on this idea of by faith. And likewise, our relationship with God should be built in the same way. So Hebrews chapter 11. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning the events as yet unseen. I want you to notice tonight 4 things about this passage that we're going to pull from it. And the first one is this, that Noah was warned by God about events not yet seen. That's how this all starts, right? By faith, Noah being warned concerning events or concerning something that has not yet happened. There's a warning that takes place. I think for most of us, we value warnings, right? We appreciate that there's warnings, that there are warning labels with things, right? And we appreciate the fact that we see a lot of value when warnings come. You know, sometimes you go to the coffee shop or maybe you go to McDonald's and you get a coffee and on the side, did you notice there's a warning? And you know what that warning said? Caution, hot. You know why it's on there? Because somebody at one time, several years ago, drank the coffee and it was too hot. And they sued McDonald's because I didn't know it was hot. It's coffee, right? So, hey, nowadays you can't sue McDonald's because they tell you on the cup, hey, caution, hot. Or I think it says contents, hot, something like that. But I think in terms of weather, you know, weather warnings, I know this past week there were some storms that hit in the southern part of our area here. Even yesterday, I guess, up in Kentucky, some pretty severe weather hit. Most of you probably use some form of warning system when it comes to weather, right? Maybe some of you have a weather radio. Others of you may use some kind of handy-dandy app on your phone that alerts you. I used to use the WKRN app. I decided very quickly I did not like the WKRN app. Nothing against WKRN, the news itself, but I get an update. If you have that installed and set to alert you about the warnings, I get every warning in the greater Nashville viewing area. So West Tennessee, when it hits them and it's 4 hours away, I still get the alert. When it's in southern Kentucky and not even headed our direction, I would get the alert. And it would go off all night long and drove me nuts. And so I trashed it. And we found an app that we can put in our address. We had to pay a fee for it, one-time fee. And we put in our address, and it will only alert us if our house is in the direct path, if the address is in the direct path of the storm. You want to talk about lifesaver. Like, I go to bed at night peacefully when storms hit because I know it's going to make this really terrible, awful sound to wake me up. If we're in the path, it gives you a warning. But otherwise, I can sleep and not have to worry about it. I don't get alerted all night to everything going on all around me that's not going to hurt me. So we value this idea of being warned and receiving warnings. Well, Noah was warned of something by God. What was Noah warned about? Look at Genesis chapter 6. Hold your spot here. Look at Genesis chapter 6. Notice God's warning to Noah. We're going to start in verse 11. Genesis 6, look at verse 11. It says, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence." Okay, keep that in mind. The earth is corrupt. It's so corrupt, it's filled with violence. God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. So God said to Noah, "I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth." Now in verse 14, he's going to start talking about how you make this ark of gopher wood, and here's how you're going to do it. But skip down to verse 17. "Behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you, and they shall be male and female. What's the warning that God gives to Noah? Say it again, Dan. Okay, I'm going to destroy the earth of all life except for life of you and your wife and your sons and their wives, because you're going to be in this ark if you build the ark, right? Now, why is he going to do it? Because the world is corrupt and it's filled with violence. In fact, go back and look at verse 5. Verse 5 says, the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that think about this, every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and the birds of heaven, for I am sorry that I have made them. You know, I know sometimes we will say something along the lines, well, things have never been worse in the world. You know, you ever said that? We like to say that. The days of Noah was pretty bad, apparently, because every thought and intention of the heart was evil. So evil that God said, you know what, I'm gonna wipe the earth out, I'm gonna cleanse the earth, and I'm gonna start over with Noah and his family. And so God warns Noah. But you get to Genesis chapter 6 and you get to verse 8, and notice what it says. It says, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Some translations say, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. What's grace? Okay, unmerited favor is how a lot of times we say it, right? But it's the idea of what? Getting what you don't deserve, right? Someone giving you something you do not deserve. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Something he didn't deserve, right? But now here's what's interesting, okay? Here's this man who found grace in the eyes of the Lord. He found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So here's the question. Why did Noah, who, by the way, wasn't a perfect man, we're going to find that out later as you read his story. We won't talk about it tonight, but you can find it out when you get to after they come off the ark. He wasn't a perfect man. So how did Noah find favor or grace in the eyes of the Lord? He was a preacher of righteousness. Yeah, Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. Noah was a man who was, it says, righteous. He was blameless in his generation. And then the last part of that verse says, Noah walked with God. Noah was a righteous man who walked with God when everybody else in his generation was evil and corrupt. Now, was Noah perfect? Absolutely not. But you know what this tells us about Noah? Noah was different. Noah was set apart, we might say, right? His life was different than the majority of the people around them because their hearts were corrupt. Their thoughts were continually corrupt. And so here Noah is, and God warns him, hey, here's what I'm going to do, right? I'm giving you grace, right? Your family's going to get grace here. But I'm going to destroy the earth, and I'm going to start all over. And I'm going to, basically, he goes on to tell him there in Genesis 6, I'm going to flood the earth. So Noah receives this warning. But here's the thing about warnings that I think we sometimes don't always think about. You can have warnings, but you still have a choice of whether or not you listen to the warning, right? I mean, I can get that alert all day long on my phone about the severe weather and how we're in the path, and I got one of two options. When it goes off, I can wake up my wife. Well, she's already awake because she heard the noise too, but we can go wake up our sons, get our dogs, and we can go, try to hide somewhere, take precaution, right, as the storm passes over, or I can look at it and say, well, I'm too tired. I don't want to get out of bed. I'm just not going to worry about it. But I have a choice. I can decide how I respond to the warning. Well, listen, Noah had a choice. God says, hey, this is what's going to happen. And Noah could have said, well, I hear what you're saying, but I just don't want to do that. Now, had Noah made that choice, what would have happened? He would have been swept away too, right? Right? Because God was granting him grace. He'd found favor in the eyes of God, right? So he receives this warning, but he still has to respond to the warning. Right? He still has to do something about it. And I think there's because so much of when you hear the story of Noah, when you go over to the New Testament, there's this parallel that is made, we already talked about in Matthew 24, where Jesus compares the days of Noah and what happened in the days of Noah to the coming of the Son of Man. And I think there's a warning there for us. And the warning for us that we're supposed to remember is the day of the Lord is coming. That's what 2 Peter chapter 3 is all about. The day of the Lord is going to come, and it's going to be just like it was in the days of Noah. And Peter goes into this description talking about, hey, remember the days of Noah? Remember what happened? Hey, here's your warning. The day of the Lord's coming. We don't know when. We don't know, the exact time frame of what that might be, or even, everything of what it might be like. But we know we've been warned. The day is coming. And we better prepare, right? We better respond to the warning and do what we need to do if we don't want to be swept away, so to speak, right, with everyone else. So God warns Noah. He gives Noah this warning. Hey, Noah, what do you need to do? Well, there's going to be a flood. I'm going to destroy the earth, and you can do something about this. So notice what it says in Hebrews chapter 11. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear, constructed an ark. See, Noah was warned by God, and then Noah responded in reverent fear and obedience. In fact, in Genesis chapter 6, after God tells Noah what he's going to do, and hey, you're going to build this ark, and this is how you're going to build it. Notice how the very last verse of Genesis chapter 6 ends. It says, the old King James, I believe, says, thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him. He did what God commanded. It's interesting when you read Genesis chapter 6 and Genesis chapter 7, one of the things that you're going to see mentioned about Noah is this idea that Noah did all that God commanded. That Noah was an individual who was obedient to God. And in a lot of ways, as you read the text, it seems that Noah was pretty obedient to God without really asking any questions. Right? I mean, I probably had a long list of questions to ask, but we don't read about him asking anything. It just says, thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him. So you got passages like Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, which describe Noah, right? And it tells us that he was righteous, that he was blameless, and that he walked with God. And I believe it's that foundation of his life, his faith, right? The fact that he walked with God, he trusted God, he wanted to be obedient to God, that led to everything else you read on that screen. Because he did that, when God made this outrageous command, and let's just face it, well, let's call it what it is. It was outrageous. Noah did all that God commanded him in Genesis 6:22. Or you get to chapter 7, verse 5, it says, Noah did all the Lord had commanded him. Genesis chapter 7, verse 9, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah. Notice, as God had commanded Noah. Genesis chapter 7, verse 16, and those that entered were male and female, and of all flesh went in as God commanded him. What's the picture that is painted of Noah in Genesis chapter 6 and 7? That he was an obedient servant, that he was willing to obey. God warns him about these events that aren't yet seen. And now you've got to keep in mind and think about, as God is explaining this, again, we get the whole story, right? Like we get to fast forward in time. Like he tells him to build an ark. Boom, he builds an ark. He gets on it. There's flood for 40 days and 40 nights. He comes off the ark. And we can read that in about 20 minutes. That's not how it happened. Noah is told to build an ark. And Noah sets out to obey God. And he's obeying God. I personally believe he's being obedient to God for something that he does not understand. Because if you go back and read Genesis chapter 2, verses 5 and 6, at that point in time, there had been no rainfall. The surface of the earth, mist would come up from the surface of the earth, and that would be what would water things. And now God is talking about opening the floodgates and rain falling from the sky, this water falling from the sky, to the point that it was going to fill the earth and destroy everything. Now, it takes a lot of faith to believe that. And in the process, God says, not only do I want you to believe that I'm going to do this, but I want you to demonstrate your faith by building this ark, this chest is what it was called. And I want you to demonstrate your faith by building this and getting your family on it. And so Noah sets out to do that. And Noah spent years and years and years obeying one command. You ever thought about that? He spent like a century obeying one command. Hey, build this ark, got to go for wood. This is how you're going to build it. That's a long time to obey one command, isn't it? But Noah did that. But why did Noah do it? Well, he trusted God. He had this trust in who God was and what God said, right? Were you going to make a comment? Oh, by faith, thank you. Yeah, by faith, right? He did it by faith. But there's another aspect back in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7, that I don't want you to miss. He constructed that ark. He did it by faith, but there's two other words that are mentioned there. What's it say? Or three other words. In reverent fear. Why did Noah respond to God's warning? Why did he obey God and do all that God commanded him? Because Noah feared God. I would suggest to you he built this ark and spent all this time building the ark not because he feared dying, but because he had a fear of God. And I'm talking about the idea of fear here is the idea of respect for God. I mean, obviously there's probably some fear of God, right? The living God that he is, but also I think there's this idea of respect. I respect him, so I'm going to obey him. Children are much more likely to obey their parents if they respect their parents, right? Than if they have no respect for their parents. So here Noah was, and he had this great respect, this reverent fear for God, and it changed everything about him. He obeys one commandment for 100 plus years, right? He's this guy who follows and does exactly what God told him to do. He didn't deviate from the plan. He didn't say, well, I know you called for gopher wood, but you know, it's hard to find gopher wood around here, God. I'm going to go to Home Depot and get some other kind of wood. He didn't do that. I know you said you wanted 2 of every kind of animal, but you know how hard it is to round up these animals? I mean, he could have responded a lot of different ways, but he didn't do that because he obeyed through faith because he had this reverent fear of God. See, when you think about this idea of fear of God should change things for us. It should change, number one, our behavior, right? The fear of God should change how I act. The fear of God should change how I, engage with my friends. It should change how I spend my weekends. It should change how I treat my spouse. It should change how I treat my children. It should change how I treat my coworkers, even the ones that are really, really annoying. Because I respect God too much to be disobedient.
Well, sometimes we have to ignore our human common sense and follow the Lord rather than what we think or how we feel.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we all can relate to that. We know what it's like to, you read some of God's commands and you think some things that God tells us to do, and we're like, but that doesn't make a lot of sense from a human standpoint. And I always think about like loving your enemies, right? And things, doing good to those who persecute you. Like, come on, God. I mean, really? But we have to understand, God knows all things. God sees the big picture, right? And there are things that we don't understand, but I'm certainly a believer that God that God isn't asking us to do something that isn't for our good or the good of others. That's why he wants us to do it. It doesn't always make sense to us. So we respond in faith by saying, okay, I have faith. I trust what you have to say. I respect you, so I will love the annoying coworker. I'll be nice to them. I won't tell them what I really think about them. I won't slap them in the face when they make me angry, right? Because we have a fear of God. It changes how we act and how we engage in people. I think it also should change how we think. How should a fear of God change the way that we think?
Well, we start to think like God thinks.
Okay, think about His ways. Okay.
And you can't fix stupid.
Say it again.
You can't fix stupid.
You can't fix stupid. Okay. That's true.
We began talking about, that this was a long time ago, right? But we realized that it was real. Well, but when Noah was alive, he was still hearing the stories of entire tribes being wiped out for people's disobedience. That wasn't that far ago.
Right.
So he's like, that's why I think he had that inner fear, because, hey, I know my parents told me that this whole group was killed because they didn't do what God told them.
Yeah. The difference between us and like the people that read about it in Scripture, they had a limited knowledge of things, and yet they were obedient. And yet you and I have full knowledge. We have God's completed word. And that ought to be enough for us to say, okay, I see what's happened in the past with different generations of people and how they responded, maybe how God responded. And you know what? I trust that. I'm going to believe that. And I don't want to be like that. I don't want to live like that, right? I don't want that to happen to me. So I'm going to fear God. And that's going to produce this change in my life and how I behave and how I think. I think you talk about this idea of changing the way you think. It's so easy to get focused on thinking about the physical and the world around us, right? Like our day-to-day and life upon this earth. And I think one of the things that when we really fear God and have this great respect for who God is and what God tells us, that maybe instead of thinking from a mere physical, worldly standpoint, we think from a more spiritual, mature standpoint, right? And this idea of, hey, I'm thinking beyond. It's kind of what Paul says in Colossians 3. Don't, dwell on the things of the earth, set your mind on things of the earth, but rather things above, right? Have this heavenly perspective, we might call it, right? That's how it should be for us. So here Noah is. God warns Noah of what's going to happen, but it's something that hasn't yet been seen, and Noah, in reverent fear, responds in obedience by constructing the ark. But then you keep reading and you get to this part. It says, by this he, Noah, condemned the world and became an heir of righteousness that comes by faith. He condemned the world. God spoke to Noah, gave Noah this warning. Noah began to respond in obedience and in reverent fear to God, doing all that God had commanded, all that God had asked of him. And in the process, the Hebrew writer says, by this, he condemned the world. What on earth are we talking about? How did Noah condemn the world?
Gave them the knowledge of what was going to happen. He gave them the choice to do something about it.
Noah gave them the knowledge? Is that what you're saying? Noah gave them the knowledge of what was going to happen and a choice?
Surely people saw him building this thing for 100+ years and came up to him and said, either what are you doing or you're a crazy nut.
Yeah.
And surely he had to have explained to them, God told me to build this. And surely they said, well, why? Because he's going to destroy the earth.
He's going to do what?
Right.
He's going to flood the earth. He's going to do what? Yeah. Like you can just imagine I've tried to picture what that would have been like. It had to be, Noah had to have the nickname Crazy Old Noah, right? He had to have some nickname like that because the people had to think this guy has lost his mind.
Hey, Justin, I think too, if Noah wouldn't have obeyed God, the world couldn't be destroyed yet. So he condemned the world by fully trusting in God, knowing that he was going to have to survive this.
Okay.
And so it allowed God to fulfill his plan, if you will.
Okay. He condemned the world through his faith, right? Okay. Let me suggest two things to you to maybe think about as we think about this idea of Noah condemning the world. The first is, I think maybe he condemned the world by the message that he preached. Look at 2 Peter chapter 2 for just a moment. 2 Peter chapter 2. It's interesting as you read in Genesis chapter 6, or Genesis chapter 6 and 7, you don't read about Noah really saying anything. You just read about Noah being told by God, here's what I want you to do, and you read about Noah's response, okay, I'm going to do all that God commanded. But you get over to 2 Peter chapter 2, and Peter's talking here about false teachers and them coming up and creeping into the midst of the believers, and he's making this comparison, and he gets to verse 4, and he says, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, and verse 5, if he did not spare the ancient world, right, but preserved Noah, so right, he cleansed the earth, but notice this next phrase. The English Standard Version says, a herald of righteousness with 7 others when he brought a flood upon the world, or brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. A herald of righteousness. That word herald there means the idea of an announcement or a messenger. It's to be a representative of someone else, someone in authority even. Some translations will translate it this way. When he spared Noah, it'll say a preacher of righteousness. Peter gives us some insight that we don't get back in Genesis. And the insight is that while Noah is building an ark, Noah's preaching. He's preaching to the people. Probably having conversations kind of what Dan was talking about, right? Where what are you doing? Well, let me tell you what's going on. Let me tell you why it's going on, right? Because everybody's corrupt. Every intention and thought of the heart is corrupt. It's evil. And so God's going to destroy it. Unless you make things right, he's going to destroy it. And it's easy for us, we read this, and again, we read it and think, okay, this all happened so quickly. Like a century passed, right? Like Noah is told by God to build this ark. He's going to build this ark, and it's going to take a long time to build the ark. And then when he's 600 years old, he's going to go into the ark and the flood's going to come. So for 100, 120 years. It seems that while Noah's building the ark, Noah's also preaching to the people. Now, nobody responds. But I think that's one way he probably condemned the world. But I think it goes even deeper than that. I think he does it by his actions, by the actions that he displayed. The key phrase for all of Noah is Genesis 6:22, his story, right? Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him. You think about what his life and what his actions told the people around him. As every day, it's here comes Noah, right? And Noah's got to go get wood. Right? I got to get the wood. And every day people see Noah, handling lumber and wood. And he's reminding them, every time they see that, he's demonstrating his faith. And every time he takes a hammer and a nail and he drives that nail, every time, he's demonstrating, I believe what God said, judgment's coming. Every day as that sweat falls down his face of his sons perhaps. He's reminding his family, we trust God. We believe what God has to say. By his actions of trusting God and believing God will do what God said, the world was being condemned. His actions spoke volumes about his faith, about his trust, and ultimately about his belief that God would do exactly what he said. So here Noah is. He's been warned. He responds by constructing the ark. In the process, he has condemned the world. But I want you to notice this middle part. I saved this for the end. Noah helped save his family. Because it says that as Noah was warned by God of these events, yet unseen in reverent fear, he constructed an ark, notice, for the saving of his household. I think that's so important. Right? Like when you think about the story of Noah and what Noah was told to do, the part of the process of building this ark was for the sake of Noah, but also for the sake of his wife, his sons, and their wives. Now, when you read the story of Noah, when you actually start back at Genesis chapter 5, and you read in Genesis chapter 5, you get to the end of it, you get some genealogy there, and you learn about Noah, and Noah bearing Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It says there at the end of chapter 5 that Noah was 500 years old when he started to bear Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So 500. You keep reading into chapter 6 when God calls him to build the ark, and you get to chapter 7 and you find out Noah does this. He gets on the ark and it's in his 600th year. That's when the flood took place. So that means that he had children, close to a son, close to 100 years old, right? So you start thinking about that. As Noah is building this ark, not only is he dealing with the magnitude of what God has called him to do, not only is he dealing with probably the ridicule of the people around him, but in the process, he's trying to demonstrate faith to his sons. And I think about, as a parent, like how difficult of a job that probably was. With each passing day, with each passing year, boys, we believe God. Boys, we trust God. Boys, we have faith in God. God's going to do what he says. For like 100 years. And eventually his family gets on board the ark. This is the interesting, or maybe not so interesting. This is the part that, you talk about what we talked about a moment ago, where Noah was a preacher of righteousness. And there's a lot of people who say, okay, so Noah preached for like 100 years, huh? And he preached for 100 years, and in that time, he saved himself and 7 other people in 100 years. That's not very good odds, right? That's a failure. But I don't think that demonstrates a failure on Noah's part. In fact, I would suggest to you that Noah really demonstrates to us what faithfulness looks like. Because here's the deal. He had to get his sons to buy in, to believe, to stay with him, to help build the ark. He had to help get his sons on the ark. And here's the thing. Once he gets on the ark, the Bible says God closes the door. And if the sons aren't inside the ark once God closes the door, guess what? Noah can't get them in anymore, no matter how bad he wants to. So he had to use the time that he had before so that they got on that ark too. You see, he wasn't a failure. I would suggest to you he was a faithful father because he did exactly what we as fathers are called to do. First and foremost, before I get anyone else to heaven, I got to get my family to heaven. I got to be an example for them and teach them about having faith in God. I got to demonstrate to them what it means to be a faithful follower of Jesus. And if I do no other good in this world, and I help to bring nobody else to Christ, but my wife and my sons are in heaven with me someday, I'd chalk that up to some success. Because there's a lot of families that wouldn't be able to say that. Noah wasn't a failure. He was faithful. He was a faithful father, and he was a faithful follower. So as we'll wrap this up tonight, and in this, just what are the life lessons? What's the big takeaway from the story of Noah and what we read about in Hebrews chapter 11? What would you say? Stay faithful. Obedience. Yeah, be obedient. Stay faithful. Trust. Yeah. I'd probably had to be patient. Noah had to be patient. Probably took a lot of patience to do what he did, to get his sons on board. But he was patient, he was faithful. And that's what we have to do. While we're here on earth, let's be patient and let's be faithful in serving God. And let's demonstrate to others our faith. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Look forward to seeing you again. Billy looks forward to teaching you next week. So thank you all for being here.